away to Harvard, where I met Meg. Now I rode that bicycle fast down the lane, leaning into the curve, rounding the corner at the preacher's house, faster and faster, remembering Elizabeth Begley and the first taste of sex that had ever happened to me anywhere but in my own head. Chapter 28. I pedaled that bicycle all the way from my growing up years to the present day, and I began to see people I knew, shopkeepers, old neighbors, and I waved and called out hi. A couple of times I stopped and talked with somebody from my school days, and that was fine. I rode over to Commerce Street, past the Slide-In Cafe, past the ice house where a bucket came flying out of the darkness just in time to trip up poor George Pearson and send him to his death by hanging. The exhilaration of my first ride through town was fading under the glare of a morning sun that was beating down hard. I was out of training for Mississippi summers. My thirst was demanding attention, and I remembered a pump at the end of the cotton-loading dock at the Gin, just down from the depot. I pedaled down Myrtle Street to the end of the platform that ran from the cotton gin beside the tracks of the Jackson and Northern line. I leaned my machine against the retaining wall and turned to the pump. As I worked the handle and reveled in the water, half drinking, half splashing my face, I heard a loud voice behind me, an angry voice. "What the hell makes you nigger boys think you can come high-walking into our town looking for a job? All our jobs belong to white men." At the other end of the platform were two large and burly men I recognized as the Pernod brothers, Jocko and Leander, an unpleasant pair of backwoods louts who had been running the cotton gin for Old Man Furnish as long as I could remember. The two of them towered over three scrawny black boys who looked to be 15 years old, maybe even younger. "Well, sir, we just thinking with the crop coming you might be needing some more help round the gin," said one of the boys. "That's the trouble with you niggers, is when you set into trying to think," said Leander Pernod. He spoke in a friendly, jokey voice, which put me and the boy off guard. But then he popped him a solid punch on the side of his face and sent the boy down onto his knees. The other boys skittered away like bugs from a kicked-over log. Suddenly, I really was back in the past, and the boy on the ground was in serious trouble, like poor George Pearson had been. There was one difference now. I was not a timid little boy. I was a grown man. As I wiped my wet hands on my shirt, I considered what I was about to do. If I caused a commotion, made a scene, called attention to myself, I might endanger my mission even before it started. But if I did nothing? Fortunately, the boy on the ground rolled over and jumped up. He sprinted off down the platform, holding his jaw, but at least he was getting away. And at that very moment, I felt something cold and hard jammed against the side of my neck. It felt an awful lot like the barrel of a gun. A deep voice behind me. "Just put your hands in the air, nice and slow, high. That's the way to do it." Chapter 29. "Now, I want you to turn around real slow, partner. Don't make any fast move." I did exactly as I was told, real slow, and found myself looking straight into the face of Jacob Gill. Jacob and I had been inseparable from as far back as I could remember, until the day I left Eudora for college. "You son of a bitch!" I shouted at him. Jacob was laughing so hard, he actually held his stomach and doubled over. His laughter made him do a little jig of delight. "You nearly gave me a goddamn heart attack," I said. "You're a jackass." "I know," Jacob said, howling some more. Then we hugged, seizing each other by the shoulders, stepping back to get a good look. "How'd you even know it was me?" I asked. "We don't have too many yellow-haired fellas 10 feet tall hanging around," said Jacob. Then he added, "I saw you decide not to mix it up with Jocko and Leander. That was smart thinking on your part." "I guess so," I said. I remembered the time Jacob left me in the swamp to watch what happened to George Pearson. I wished I could tell him why I'd held back this time. "Hey, it's near dinner time," Jacob said, and lightly punched my shoulder. "Let's go get some catfish." "That sounds good. Where are we going?" "Don't tell me you've turned into such a big city boy you forgot Friday is catfish day at the Slide Inn." Chapter 30. I pushed the bicycle between us down Myrtle Street toward the town square. Jacob stopped twice along the way to take a nip of whiskey from a pint he kept in his worn leather toolbox, and I said hello to a couple more people I recognized or who remembered me. The Slide Inn was alive with the hum of conversation, the smell of frying fish, the smoke from the cigars of the old fellows who always occupied the front table, solving the world's problems on a daily basis. "Why aren't you staying out at your daddy's?" Jacob asked as soon as we sat down at a corner table. "You know my father," I said. It seemed like Maybell's was the smart place to be. My father and I just don't get along. "All right, then, but there is one question I've been dying to ask. What in hell are you doing back in Eudora?" "Nothing much," I said. "I've got a little business to tend to." "Lawyer business?" "Just a simple job for the Justice Department. I have to interview a few lawyers in the county. That's all it is." "In the meantime, it's catfish," I said. Pretty soon, Miss Fanny came from behind the counter bearing plates of crispy fried fish, sizzling hot hush puppies, and ice-cold sweet pickle coleslaw. The first bite was delicious, and every bite after. I asked Miss Fanny what time the place opened for breakfast, and made up my mind never to suffer through another of Maybell's breakfasts. "Hell, I look old, but you still look like a high school boy, Ben," said Jacob, "like you could run 10 miles and never even break a sweat." "Oh, I did plenty of sweating just riding that bike a dozen blocks," I said. "It'll take me a while to get used to this heat again. How you been keeping yourself, Jacob?" "Well, let me see. You probably heard I turned down the offer to be ambassador to England, and that was right after I passed on the chance to be president of the university up in Tuscaloosa. Well, sir, it was shortly after that I made up my mind that the profession I was most suited for was as a carpenter's assistant." "That's good," I said. "Honest work." "Yeah, me and Wiley Davis are the men you want to see if you need a new frame for your window screens, or a new roof for your Johnny house." Then there was silence, a good and acceptable kind of silence, nothing nervous or uncomfortable about it. The kind of quiet that is tolerable only between old friends. It was Jacob who finally broke it. "They were good days, Ben, weren't they?" "They were great days." "We were friends, right through it all." "The best," I said. "We were like brothers." We clinked our iced tea glasses, then Jacob spoke. "But there's one thing I need to make very clear to you, Ben." "What's that?" I tried to keep the note of concern out of my voice. "You said we were like brothers." "Yeah, that's what I said." "I just need to remind you of something." "Well, go ahead, Jacob," I said. "I was always the pretty one." Chapter 31. Enough. Enough idle thoughts about my long-ago romance with Elizabeth Begley. Enough turning over in my mind the painful lack of affection between my father and me, the disgust in his face when he saw me for the first time in 6 years. Enough reliving an old friendship like Jacob's and mine. Theodore Roosevelt hadn't sent me to Eudora to take a rickety bicycle ride down memory lane. I had a job to do, and it might even help change history. I paid the bill for our lunch, and Jacob left 2 bits for Miss Fanny. Then he headed off up Commerce Street to help Wiley frame a new roof for the front porch of the town hall. An old black man stepped off the sidewalk as Jacob passed, not to avoid a collision, but simply making the customary show of respect. Black men of all ages had been stepping down off sidewalks to get out of my way since I was 5 years old. I rode the bicycle back to Maybell's, changed my shirt, and set off on foot for the Eudora quarters. On my way out, I made sure to tell her I had some interviews to attend to. I considered trying to hire a horse and buggy and couldn't think of anywhere in town to do such a thing. My father had 3 perfectly good horses in his barn, of course, but I was determined to do what I came to do without him. Abraham Cross, Eudora Quarters, said the slip of paper the president had given me. It was time for me to meet this Mr. Cross. Chapter 32. I knew the streets of the quarters almost as well as I knew the rest of Eudora. I knew the history of how it came to be. After the war, the slaves from all the plantations and farms in the vicinity of Eudora had been freed. Most of them had either left their previous lodgings or been turned out by masters who no longer wanted to provide housing for people they didn't own. So the freed slaves built their homes where no one else wanted to live, in a swampy, muddy, mosquito-ridden low place 1/2 mile north of the center of Eudora. They gathered fallen logs from the woods and lumber from derelict barns to build their little houses. They laid boards across the swampy, pestilential ground to keep their children's feet out of the mud. They stuffed rags and old newspapers in the chinks in the walls to keep out the wind in winter. They ate squirrel and possum, poke salad and dandelion greens. They ate weeds from the field, horse corn, the leftover parts of a pig, and whatever else they could get their hands on. Walking along there now, as the neighborhood changed from poor white to poorer black, I saw a colored man sitting on the porch of a shack painted a gay shade of blue. He nodded at me. I returned his nod. "Pardon me, do you know a man by the name of Cross? Abraham Cross?" He never blinked. His eyes didn't move from mine, but I had the feeling he was deciding whether or not I was worthy of the information I sought. "Yes, sir," he finally said. "If you just keep walking, you will come on a house with a strong smell of onions. That will be Abraham's house." The sight of a white man walking on this street was not a welcome one for most of the people I came across. They kept their eyes down as they passed, which seemed to be customary now in Eudora, but had not been the case when I was a boy. Within minutes I caught the sharp tang of onions on the air. I saw thick patches of the familiar blue-green stalks in the yard of a small red house. Suddenly, from the space between 2 houses, one little boy came running, followed by 2 more, and 2 more in pursuit. "He gonna snatch you and eat you!" the lead boy shouted. Then I saw what was chasing them. A wild pig, huge and hairy and grunting, bearing down on the boys with a pair of very bad-looking tusks. "That ain't the most beautiful animal in the world," said a colored man standing on the porch of the red house. I answered, "That is a face not even a mother could love." I looked closer. The man was taller than me by at least 3 inches, and older by at least 40 years. "But she sure is beautiful when she's angry," he said. We both laughed. Then he said, "Begging your pardon, sir, but I get the idea you might be looking for someone." "Well, as a matter of fact, I am looking for a man. His name is Abraham Cross." "Yes, sir. You looking at him?" I must have appeared surprised. "You's expecting some young fella, weren't you, Mr. Corbett?" "No,